Professor Kylie O'Brien, and I'd like to welcome you to Considering Cannabis, an ICCM podcast. And I'll tell you a little bit about the ICCM later. That's the International College of Cannabinoid Medicine. And the topic today is the politics of cannabis in Australia. Now, before I give you a bit of background, I want to introduce my guest today, Dr. Brian Walker, and he was elected to the Western Australian Legislative Council this year as the Legalizing Cannabis WA party member for the East Metropolitan region. Now, he's a doctor, so he graduated from medicine at the University of Dundee, and he's practiced in a lot of different countries, including Germany, the Soviet Union, the UK and Hong Kong, before he came back to Australia in 2008, and he set up a specialist GP practice in Perth in Western Australia. So welcome, Brian.
Hey, how are you?
Why do you care about cannabis?
Oh, that's a long question. One of the problems I faced as a practicing general practitioner is that you are often completely unable to help the patient. You sit in front of someone unable to influence their pain, for example, or unable to make any real inroads into their mental wellness because of a variety of conditions. Now, cannabis comes along and you absolutely know that this healthy, healing herb can make a big difference to this individual's life. And so when I'm prescribing cannabis and people are coming in and saying, "You have saved my life, I'm no longer wishing to kill myself, or I can live again," every single time, it just makes my heart jump for joy. So I care about this because it matters, because people's wellness matters to me.
So what are the main issues that you see? I've brought up a few, I guess, but what are the main issues that you see around cannabis access in Australia?
Oh, there's a wide variety. I think cost is a huge one here. I've got so many people who are simply unable to afford cannabis, so they have to resort to growing their own and making it themselves, and therefore they criminalize themselves. Another aspect here is you have to justify well, I'm an authorized prescriber, I can prescribe, but I can still be called to justify why I'm giving cannabis to a patient who is benefiting from it, but they've got to pass the rules. You can only give it for this, you can't give it for that. And another area is it's difficult to prescribe cannabis to, say, someone under 18. This is forbidden here. We can't actually prescribe. We send to the specialist. We're required to, but the specialist has got no knowledge of cannabis, so they're not actually specialists at all. I have one 11-year-old autistic boy who really wanted some just ordinary CBD, and he didn't get that. He had to go to a specialist, and the specialist prescribed him clonazepam and risperidone. And this is atrocious. It is life-threatening to do that. And still, we accept this as being that the specialist has spoken, the GP will obey, type of stuff. And when we look at the number of people suffering and dying because of the medication we prescribe, you begin to understand we're in a very sick system. So that is conspiring against wellness. But wellness is my passion. The health industry is actually a sickness industry. So this is why I'm outside of that.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you there. My background is, of course, Chinese medicine. So, yes. And now, driving laws, that's another issue, isn't it? Because
yes.
In all our states and territories, just for our international audience, it's a driving offence in all our states and territories to have any amount of THC in your body, regardless of whether you're impaired or not. So why have we got such silly driving laws, Brian?
Oh, because silly people are making the laws. I'll go back a step here. You mentioned earlier we can compound individualized cannabis preparations. Well, technically we can, but the chief pharmacist has put a ruling in, a regulation which prevents us from doing the compounding. And so actually the laws which technically allow that, we're not allowed to do. You can actually face the full force of the law as being a drug supplier, a drug dealer, if they're so minded to do so. So actually we're not allowed to compound.
Now, is that just
Now,
in Western Australia or
just in WA, yes.
just in
I don't know
WA?
about other states, but in WA, I'm tracing that one down, and I will be actually seeking more information. But this is atrocious. But going on to the driving legislation, they've equated the presence of THC with equivalent to impairment. Now, for the viewers there, THC can last, it is fat bound, so it can last for weeks after consumption of cannabis, especially if you're taking it on a regular basis. Now, if you are going to, smoke cannabis, which I don't recommend you do, it's the most unhealthy way of taking cannabis, you could then have positive cannabis for days, weeks. But the impairment, if there is any, is only for about 4 hours.
Correct.
Now, so this means that you could actually be deemed to be impaired when in fact you are not. So what we've got now is a police force which has been required by law to become professional liars. You're saying you are impaired when what they're really saying is we have detected a substance. And this is unscientific, and it's completely immoral, because now policemen can decide whether a patient takes his medication or not. So are we making policemen equivalent to doctors, that they can decide what medication a person can or cannot take?
And I guess there's other drugs on the market that people could be prescribed for various conditions, and they're probably going to impair you more, perhaps, than even cannabis. Would that be
well,
correct?
undoubtedly, but let's take, for example, heroin. Now, the derivatives of heroin, oxycodone, oxycontin, endone, even panadine forte with the codeine preparation there, you will be impaired from that. But if you then, say, rock up on site and have a drug test and you test for positive for opiates, you then show a prescription for oxycodone, okay, in you go. And no one cares whether you're impaired or not. There's an even bigger problem. You can go, say, on site, or you can be driving your car sleep impaired.
Yes.
Okay, and you are then at dangerous driving, but no one's testing you for impairment, and nothing tests up. So what we're allowing people to do is to drive impaired or to work impaired, and there's no safety there. But driving with a THC present in your system, you're deemed to be impaired, and therefore you are not only lose your car, but you can also lose your ability to travel, because you're now a convicted criminal. This is obscene. It is obscene. But also, people are dying and suffering illness because they have been affected, either themselves or their work comrade has been affected by prescription drugs or indeed sleep deprivation, and they have suffered, and we haven't protected the people properly.
Well, Canada legalised recreational use a few years now, and they get around the driving laws quite well by basically saying it's not illegal unless you're impaired and drive.
Just like alcohol.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, what's the barrier for us to have a similar sort of system as Canada in terms of our driving laws? In other words, you know, if you've got a prescription for it, and you know, you're shown to be impaired, well, that's one thing. But if you're not impaired, you know, then you shouldn't be given a ticket.
Well, this is one thing we're actually working on in Parliament in WA at the moment. I shall be chasing very closely this driving impairment. In fact, in the next weeks, this is going to be something we're bringing forward. The Premier and the Cabinet are aware of this, and they're quite shocked to find there's no medical defence against driving with THC in the system. So I expect changes will happen, but, you know, in Parliament, things go very slowly. The bigger question, of course, is the occupational safety and health regulations, where we want really to increase that, because the unions must surely be interested that their workers are at danger of undetected impairment and the false recognition of impairment. So we're working on this. There will be a change, but slowly.
Yes, yeah. Now, there's often a distinction made between sort of recreational use of cannabis and medicinal use of cannabis. But do you really think there's such a clear distinction, or is there some overlap? Particularly if we think about the medicinal use of cannabis to include not just addressing disease or illness, but actually promoting well-being, relieving stress, for example. We know that stress underpins a lot of different chronic illnesses, don't we?
Oh, hugely. I don't actually see a difference between recreational use and medicinal use. Most of the people taking cannabis, at least in large amounts, are treating their own illnesses. For example, their mental health problems. Let's take, for example, a woman who is domestically violated and beaten up, 4 children, not enough money to put food on the table, and relieves that stress, not with alcohol, which kills 6,000 people a year in Australia, but with some cannabis. Now we've taken her and we've criminalized her. So we've made the whole thing worse. And that's costing us money. It's costing us people. It's costing us every aspect of a caring society. So I would strongly advocate for the fact that most people are treating themselves, and they've got a perfect right to. You could go further and say perhaps people are over-treating themselves, the people who are using excessive amounts of THC. This is why we need to legislate, because we allow people to use cannabis properly rather than profligately if they're doing their best without the adequate support of properly trained doctors and therapists.
That's right. And as you say, even the ones you talked about access before, and cost being prohibitive, and that of course then drives the illegal market, because it's cheaper to buy oil on the illegal market, and the problem with that is that you don't know the quality that you're getting.
Well, take it a stage further. We're taking, say, the mine sites. So Western Australia, of course, is a mining state. And there's a 0 THC tolerance. If you walk onto a mine site having taken cannabis the week before and your week off, and you test positive, you are not only taken off the mine site, you're banned from working in any other mine. Now, what's happened is that the people who need to take some time off and have some recreational use of cannabis have said, right, okay, we can't take cannabis. This has driven a huge methamphetamine habit. So we've driven people from using safe THC into the hands of criminals who are selling methamphetamine, and it has devastated people. So we have actually created a drug problem.
Wow, well, that's something I didn't know. Look, I'll flip it to a different kind of angle now. So there's lots of different reports on the cannabis industry worldwide, and it suggests that cannabis, could bring substantial revenue to countries who are embracing the cannabis industry, right? So why aren't our state and territory governments and our federal government embracing such an opportunity for revenue like some of the other countries are?
That's an excellent question. I have asked that in Parliament, and next week in my budget reply speech, I'll be bringing that point up again. But people are aware of this. I mean, if we were to legalize not just cannabis for personal use, but the whole hemp plant, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, which would revolutionize, say, agriculture in Western Australia, would revolutionize, it would make us a self-sustaining state, which is wonderful. It would give us a huge microclimate change. Hemp as a plant is fantastic when it comes to actually regenerating soil and returning the land in good condition to the indigenous peoples. It's a huge benefit. Not people speak about cannabis as a drug, a dangerous drug. It's actually a life-saving plant.
Yes, well, the hemp seeds themselves have got amazing nutraceutical benefits. Huge. So, there's a lot of evidence in the scientific literature about the benefits of hemp seed oil, including having almost the perfect ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. That's only one of its benefits. So, and when you look at the use of water when you grow hemp compared to, say, cotton, there's sort of lots of, benefits agriculturally. I'm not an agricultural expert, but, I can see that, we think about cannabis and hemp in our world of, clinical medicine and things like that. But you've got this great industry where, you can make bricks, which are apparently super for making houses and buildings out of because of their insulation properties. There's just so many uses of hemp.
Well, one of the things we're looking at with the hempcrete, making houses out of hemp,
Yeah.
apart from the, as you said, the saving of costs because of lack of air conditioning and lack of heating, because it regulates the temperature, regulates the humidity. It also can allow you to live in a house which is free of the electromagnetic shielding, which we think might be a problem. Yeah, the Faraday cage. But
Yes.
also in Western Australia, well, in all of Australia, you can actually, because hempcrete as a building substance is fire resistant, it doesn't burn. Therefore,
Really?
yes, you could therefore, and I'm putting this forward, you could make fire resistant shelters next to your house in the country or in the bush
Yeah.
areas, that if
Yeah.
you're defending your home or protecting your animals, if the fire comes over you, you can seek shelter in that very
Amazing.
safe hempcrete shelter. And this is another revolutionary step in
Great.
protecting Western Australian society.
Well, that's
I'm also,
amazing.
yes, I've lived most of my life in the country. I was brought up in the country areas, and so I used to work in the wheat belt here. And
Yeah.
with 2 crops a year of drought-resistant hemp, you can actually greatly transform the dependence on wheat and sheep, which is a very difficult thing to manage in our marginal areas. It's quite a problem, especially this last season. Bumper crop, and then a frost came along, and
Yes.
some of my friends have lost 80% of their crop.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly given me something to think about. I live in the country too, in Victoria, and 2 years ago, we had the biggest fires that we've had in decades in this area, and it was 100 metres down the road from my house. We got evacuated, and I didn't think I was going to have a house standing there next day, but luckily our CFA, our fire authority, is in the same street, and I don't think they would have looked very good if they'd let our street burn down, given that their fire station is in it. So they sort of saved the township. But yeah, you're right. There is, where do you go if there's a fire? If you can build your own bunker made of hempcrete, how amazing would that be? And you're right, to protect your animals. Really important, even if it's just, domestic animals, but even your livestock.
Well, let's take it a step further with hemp. For example, a friend of mine is building hemp cars. Now, the hemp itself is stronger than steel. It looks like a composite. It is a composite. You can build boats from it. You can build cars from it. Even in the electric vehicle realm, we're building hemp batteries now. We can use hemp to make green hydrogen fuel. And in our area, with the wind and the sun, we can actually do it without reliance on fossil fuels. So the whole thing is just, it could transform our society.
So, I actually have heard of cars being built out of hemp before, and the properties of that. I mean, what's stopping us?
Well, so what's stopping us is 80 years of negative propaganda, and that was actually a racist, xenophobic rant, which is utterly improper. We ought to really ride this one home and say this: we do not allow ourselves to be influenced by racist, xenophobic, unscientific political rants. This is not proper. The other thing here is that people, because we haven't had the ability to do the scientific research because of the 80 years of the propaganda against hemp, we're only now catching up and realizing the significance of cannabis in our bodies.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now, what formal government-led inquiries have there been in recent years into cannabis, and how effective do you think they've been?
Oh, the recent one, actually, Fiona Patton did this wonderful study in the Victoria Parliament. I thank her so much for that. That was very, very informative. In fact, we tabled that in the Parliament of Western Australia.
Right.
Now, we're putting forward the request to have a select committee in Western Australia. It hasn't been approved yet, but we're putting the request forward, and that will be a very interesting thing to move forward. And all things being well, I'll be part of that, maybe even the chairman. So that's happening as well. The information, we're on a daily basis, we're bringing this forward to the ministers of the government in Western Australia, and by daily mentioning cannabis, we're actually desensitizing people to this 80 years of negative propaganda. And it's now become normalized. And the cabinet is now considering aspects here. For example, how do you manage the PTSD in serving police officers or the armed forces?
Yes.
So we're making it relevant to the people who are suffering in Western Australia. So I do see things will happen, because with all the criticism of politicians, of whom I am one now, with all the criticism, it has to be said, we really care. We do care about our people. This is why we're here.
That's right. So what happened in Victoria out of that report that was tabled? What happened there?
Well, sadly, there was a split recommendation. The committee was very strongly in favor of legalizing cannabis, if not decriminalizing it. But we had a minority report by some government members, which then took precedence in the government, because they didn't really want to support cannabis. And so the report has been watered down. You have to expect this. It takes a while to break down those barriers.
Yeah. So how far away do you really think we are in Australia in allowing recreational use? I mean, the Australian Capital Territory, they introduced new legislation, and I can't remember whether that was last year or...
I think it's 2019.
It started last year. And so now you can have, I think, up to 4 plants per household. You can have a certain amount of dried cannabis on you. You've still got lots of other things in place to protect children, of course, and you've still got the driving law problem in the ACT anyway. But that's just one state and territory. Interesting that it was the Australian Capital Territory that started that. So how
you didn't actually. You didn't start it, because 2003 in WA, we had the Gallop government brought in the decriminalising. You could have 2 plants of your own and a certain quantity of cannabis for personal use. Then Barnett came in, the Liberal Premier, and was strong on law and order. Of course, that doesn't work. But he banned all cannabis, and we still got that. Now, the Labour Party here on its party platform still says we're going to return to that, and it will happen. We've pushed that forward, and I suspect it'll come back in again. However, our party, Sophia Mormont and myself, we're actually crafting legislation to bring before Parliament next year. It's actually with the drafters just now. That'll be looking at legalizing cannabis. And we're getting a number of approaches for that, with all the safeties, like not too young children, under certain conditions, so that we have the safeguards there, because we have to be aware that cannabis, although it's a healthy healing herb, it can be used improperly.
That's right. And so public education, like Canada has done, is going to be a very big part of that, I would imagine.
Yes. Well, we're doing that now with our social media, and bit by bit is getting out. We think about 70% of our population is in favor of legalizing cannabis. It's just a matter of making the politicians aware of that. Okay.
So do you think it ultimately comes down to public pressure then?
Absolutely. The point we are making is we need to have a pronged attack. On the one hand, we would like to focus the social anger, not the kind of mob rule, but the anger. This is what we need. We're suffering if we don't have this, and more and more and more to raise this profile, much like voluntary assisted dying, much like the legalized gay marriage approach. We need to get the people asking for this. On the other hand, we're educating the politicians and bringing forward the financial reasons, the billions that can be made available, the hospitals we could afford, the special care baby units we could afford, if we allowed this to become a revenue generating source of income. Now, that would allow the politicians to then say, yes, this is a sensible thing to do, and not be seen to be bowing to the public anger.
Yes, I guess the stigma has, stuck for so many decades. And it's interesting because I would think that alcohol is a much more dangerous social drug, if you're looking at it as a social drug, than cannabis. And I think that's quite obvious. And we've also seen in the literature that criminalising drugs doesn't work anyway as a public health measure.
Well, look at Indigenous health. In the Kimberley, in the north of WA, there's about 60% of the children there are born with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, 60%. We have a huge problem there. If we were to let alcohol take a backseat and allow people to manage their mental health with cannabis, that would go down tremendously. I'm not saying cannabis is safe in pregnancy, but it's a lot safer than alcohol.
Yes, yeah. Well, Brian, I'd really like to thank you for being our very first guest on Considering Cannabis, our first podcast for the ICCM. For our viewers, the ICCM, www.iccm.co, is an online learning platform for healthcare practitioners focused squarely on medicinal cannabis. So I'd encourage you to go to our website, have a look. You can even sign up to our free foundation course on medicinal cannabis. And we've got lots and lots of experts from all over the globe talking about different clinical conditions and the evidence base around medicinal cannabis as a treatment option. So again, Brian, thanks so much for being part of this. I'm going to be watching your career with great interest, and I'm just so pleased that we've got a doctor who's actually advocating for cannabis, not just medically, but I guess as a human right for people to be able to have access to an amazing plant. So thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, a great honor.
Great, thank you.